Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it's been a good year. I've enjoyed some, what's happened in terms of the game community and the conversation we've been having, and it looks like we've kind of like a group of people is starting to kind of coalesce, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I'm just, I'm happy to be a small part of it as we talk about gaming a little bit more. Um, and I've said over and over again in some of the videos I've made, and certainly other people have made this point as well a lot actually, is that definitions are important. We can't really have an intelligent discourse if we're all using different terms for something. And this happens all the time where we all think we're talking about the same thing, but we realize that when somebody's talking about story or agency, it turns out we're talking about completely different things. Um, so one of the other things that kind of hit me today is that you know another place where it's important to know what's going on, behind the curtain, what's when you're trying to have this intelligent discourse with other people, is you've got to know what their intentions and their rationale for their preferences and their beliefs are. And sometimes you can, well, and the two things I'll kind of hit on today are things like game complexity. So, certainly there's a group of people that prefer complicated games or complex games, uh, and also, things like GM Fiat. And there's certainly a group of people that decide, well, that's bad. And, what is GM Fiat? But they decide there is such a thing, and it's bad. However, if you talk to them or you listen to them talk, you've come to find out that there's different reasons for their preferences. And I'll go on a little side tangent and say, like, hey, look, I'm really probably rules medium, probably not rules light. But anyhow, I digress. Um, so I'm trying to cover, and this is kind of like more like a shotgun sort of like thing on this topic, and I'll probably interject some subjective things here and there, but I don't want to go off on too many tangents. So I'm probably just going to leave a lot of things kind of floating, and hopefully the video doesn't get too long, but I don't know. Um, I had kind of one of those little mini, Facebook Messenger conversations with Runeslinger this morning, and it's funny because you have to go back. I'm actually looking back at my phone every once in a while. I look down, and I'm looking at my phone to kind of find what one of us said, because I don't want to misquote it. Um, but he talked about the idea that like you need to get a group of people together that can hear meanings and adapt to the shifting perspective in each speaker through the length of the conversation, and that's no mean feat. That's a little tough, but I think we're getting there. And once again, it's kind of neat to be a small part of that. So you'll probably recognize some people when I make some statements about like preferences and motivations. So, I'm not going to call anybody out, but it's funny. Actually, speaking of being called out, Runesinger sort of called me out in a friendly way in a comment to my video about running Desolation, Ubiquity for the first time, saying, seeking instant perfection is madness. And of course, that made me laugh because for a couple of reasons. One, because I am like that. And, second thing is because, I said, gosh, maybe I'm not, I have more in common with some people than I thought. Because, some people, if you listen to talk, they do want some instant perfection. And so let's go to this first point. If you like complicated games, or you meet somebody, and they say, well, I like a complex rule set, and they start to talk about why, and they'll start to talk about the idea they want like almost an instant perfection or perfection from the game experience itself. Like they're looking for a reliable game experience, and the vehicle they choose to get that reliable experience is the system itself. And so you might hear them talk about things like games that have an embedded narrative structure and lots of systems and subsystems. And part of what this does is ensure that this, you get to where you want to go. Um, and you find out that that's one of the reasons they want this complicated game. Is to get them there. And to me, and here's one of my little subjective things. One of the tragedies that happens in that is by seeking to remove the risk of a bad game session, you kind of rob yourself of the experience of the phenomenal one. Because, when you're doing that to a certain extent, or if that's your motivation, what you're kind of doing is, getting rid of the human element. The humans, can't, that's us. We can't screw it up that bad. But at the same time, it makes it a little bit harder for us to make it great. So I'm not knocking complex systems. I'm just talking about motivations. There's other people you'll talk to. And these can all be the same person sometimes too. So obviously, there's going to be multiple motivations. I'm not that's naive. Talked to somebody today and was making comments on my video. It reminded me of many people I've talked to where, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but the idea that games, they want a game that can cover a lot of stuff, all the eventualities. It's probably one of the first concepts I ran into when I made my first video. That's a motivation for somebody. They want a game that can really handle all these eventualities, and they for them GM Fiat is this notion that they don't want the game master to be making up these rulings on the spot. They want the game to be consistent. And it's funny, I kind of thought about today, and one of the, I'm going to guess, and I don't think there's any way to really take a survey, but if you talk to people and ask them, that people are talking about not liking Game Master Fiat, and they want things to be consistent and what have you. My guess is a lot of them are going to be game masters themselves, because sometimes what I hear people saying, tacitly, is this guy made a ruling that I wouldn't have made. I would have done it differently. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but it kind of makes me chuckle. And I've certainly had that experience sitting at the game table where somebody's made a ruling, or whatever, and I'm thinking, man, I don't think I would have done it that way. And I didn't argue with them. They may have interjected something once. I'm not going to lie, but thought, gosh, that's not how it rolled with that. And so I'm wondering how much of if a person has that kind of context and experience, whether they're more likely to kind of all of a sudden declare Game Master Fiat a bad thing. Anyhow, let's go on. I'm sorry, I took a bunch of notes, so I'm looking at my phone and everything like that. So I'm gonna try not to ramble too much. But let's figure out another thing that let's see. I had this. Oh yeah, well, here's another thing as far as the rules should cover this, and Game Master Fiat, and we'll get back to Game Master Fiat and what it is or isn't, and is a game master a player. So try to hold that in my head. I'm gonna try to, so I don't get too off track. Some other people I've talked to have mentioned more like the rules should cover all these things, and one of the rules and things the rules should cover or make clear. One of the reasons they should do that is because the players need to be able to make informed choices, and I put words in their mouth and say extremely informed choices. And sometimes here's my subjective part again. As I listen to some of their arguments, and I don't disagree with them necessarily, but at some point, the informed choices or the player knowledge that they seek to get is over and above what a real person in a real world would actually have. And it's manifestly greater than what an actual person would know. What are my exact chances? What are all the factors, even those I haven't thought of? Could you remind me of what those are? The rulings in those cases, they seem to be unfair or anathema to them from a little bit of a different angle. And maybe it's probably not ruling. I think I said that and then said, wait a minute, I don't think ruling is the word I'm looking for. It's narrating in the absence of a mechanic which supports it. So the game master narrates something, and but the mechanics aren't necessarily there to support that narration. Actually, somebody else mentioned that to me from a different perspective. But I think that's another motivation or intention for wanting to have a game that covers things, and another motivation or intention or perspective in terms of Game Master Fiat. So let me talk about this Game Master Fiat a little bit. And this is, I'm going to try not to be pugnacious, but so I've had a couple days to really think about this, because I was actually thinking about this a little bit after watching a video a couple days ago. As you listen to some people talk about Game Master Fiat and how they don't want that, and I sometimes get the impression as they talk that they want to reduce the game master to somebody who is the keeper of secrets. There's things you're not supposed to know, out of character either. So, keep these secrets. They're the page turner. They're the cameraman. They're the facilitator of your spotlight time. But they're not a player, because the moment that the game master has any sort of creative narration, then at that point they're overstepping their boundaries and invoking the dreaded GM Fiat. And I'm not gonna quote him exactly right, But Runesinger has said before that when the game master is a player, and when they're playing is when they're narrating the results of like dice rolls, when they're narrating outcomes. Um, somebody else, complex games apologist, talked about like GM as editor, which I get it, and that's certainly a part of a game master's role. I like that little idea, but also the idea that like the game master is a player, and if I was approached by a group and they told me this is what we want you to do, we want you to be a combination. They're not going to say it in these terms, but what I start to hear is we want you to be a combination computer and servant, and kind of turn the pages of the story that we're involved in. But we don't really want you to have any kind of creative, narration anywhere. At that point, I'm gonna sit down for a second with a calculator and figure out how much I'm going to charge them, because I'm not going to be playing a game. I'm going to be performing a service, and I got news for you: it's not going to be cheap. Okay, so that's part of it, or that's part of my perspective. What some people call GM Fiat, often, really to me is like, well, this is my chance to play. And and part of it goes back to another rationale or whatever intention that players I've seen have is they simply don't trust them, and I've talked about that many times. And if you don't trust somebody, don't play with them. So I've heard that rationale before, or like that's something to kind of tease out that somebody wants a complex rule set or whatever because they want to avoid that GM Fiat in terms of the game master screwing them. So let me kind of recap. I think, or hope, to recap a little bit. So you've definitely got the people that want some kind of system that does things, or I don't want to say does everything, but make sure that the game master isn't going to, screw them. So there's a rule for that, so that way I'm protected. And then there's people that want a complex game because they simply feel that it should cover things. They don't want to have to look up or stop their game to make a ruling. They want things to be consistent. They don't necessarily want GM Fiat because they probably would have done it differently. So they don't want the surprise in that manner. Then there's the intention or motivation for wanting a complex game because you want to have this whole narrative structure or whatever that exactly what's going to happen. You want this guaranteed good experience from the game, and so you don't want the GM messing that up. Or kind of, I guess I don't know if I talked about this one enough, but like one stomping over your agency. that would be probably different motivation too. For in many cases kind of wanting a game that's a little more complicated. Sometimes it's just that you don't want GM Fiat, and that's why, because I'm going to tell the story here, not the game master, which probably goes back a little bit to my last point about not wanting to be a robot myself. And then there's the idea that like you want a game that has enough systems and subsystems and transparency in some manner, so that you can make an informed choice as a player, and you know exactly what your chances are. But to me sometimes it borders on or sometimes crosses well over the border of meta knowledge. And the example I used when I'm talking to Runesinger today was, and this probably isn't the best example in the world, but it's kind of like an operating system. And I think some people want the workings of the game to be kind of like DOS, where you can kind of go and you can see exactly what's going on. And what really drives them crazy is maybe there's not as many rules, and the operating system, it's in the game master's head to a certain extent, and it's kind of like, I guess, Snow Leopard, isn't that Apple? And they can't see in that as well, and that drives them crazy. So maybe that's another motivation. And I tell you what, it's been my experience, and I'm not going to preach too much, but I've had the privilege of playing with some great game masters and some great people, and the drudgery of going through sessions where we weren't quite coalescing yet, or the drudgery of playing with other people where they weren't quite as good, has it paid off for the when you get that phenomenal game session where it's firing on all cylinders, and the human element is really producing fantastic results. However, that's not preaching. But this is a kind of a longer video than I want it to be, and probably very, very rambly, so I apologize. But just the idea that it's important to know not only definitions that people are using and making sure you're on the same page, but like when you're a person that you're in a discourse with, when they say they prefer a certain thing, it's important to know why. What are your intentions for wanting a complicated game or for in eliminating GM Fiat? What are your rationales? Because sometimes you assume they have one rationale, and it turns out it's something completely different. You could probably identify the 4 people, 3 or 4 people I've talked about today, if you watch their videos or listen to the conversations a little bit. But in my experience, it turns out that they have very different motivations. So that's it. The video is too long, and I'll talk to you later.